everyone. I'm Jayne Groll, CEO of the DevOps Institute. I'm so excited to be here today at Unscripted talking about innovation. And so my panel of innovators really represent a wide swath of experiences, of lenses, and hopefully during the next several minutes, we'll be able to talk about innovation from a DevOps perspective, from a human perspective, and of course, as we emerge through and into the next decade. But to get started, let's have our panel introduce themselves. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your role, your organization, and then we'll kick off the conversation. So Ravi, why don't you start?
Sure, yeah, I'm Ravi Lachhman. I'm an evangelist at Harness. And so what an evangelist does, I marry people in software. At least that's what I tell my mother. So I focus on our ecosystem of where we touch.
Fantastic, thank you. Kandarp, what about you? Would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Kandarp. I work at Xactly as a VP of engineering. Xactly provides, a sales performance management solution by unleashing human potential. So starting from the planning, sales planning, all the way to the sales execution. That's where our sweet spot is.
Fantastic, thank you. Rajsi, would you introduce yourself, please?
Of course. My name is Rajsi Rana. I'm a senior PM at Oracle Cloud. I work in the North America Cloud Engineering Organization, and currently I'm doing special projects. So whatever is required to make sure Oracle Cloud provides the best experience possible to our customers.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Christian, what about you?
Yeah, hi, I'm Christian Posta. I'm the global field CTO at a startup called Solo.io. And at Solo, we're working to disrupt a traditional API infrastructure space and focus more on decentralizing some of those operations and enabling self-service and ownership and some of the practices around that you see form around DevOps with technologies like service mesh, like decentralized gateways and WebAssembly and that sort of stuff.
So thank you. So for those of you listening, as you probably can tell, I've got really an amazing group of panelists here with a wide lens on innovation. And so let's talk about innovation. 2020 comes as no surprise to anyone that this has been an unprecedented year. And, people have learned to hate that word, right? Unprecedented. But it is true that we've not seen a year like this, particularly those of us in the tech community when we were still growing. We're a fairly young industry. We were still growing. And then suddenly and very dramatically, the world shifted. Right, where we kind of understood our environments, we kind of understood our roles, we kind of understood if you were part of a business unit, what your role was. And suddenly in March, you were working from home, your children didn't have childcare, your enterprise was trying to compete. There was obviously economic impact and all of that. So from my experience, innovation was not only an option for 2020, it was a requirement in order for individuals and enterprises to stay afloat in kind of very, very unique and different times. So let's start talking about that. What kind of innovations have you seen from individuals or organizations that have really helped themselves and their businesses navigate through these waters that we haven't seen before? Who wants to go first?
I can go.
Right? Okay, Rajsi, go ahead.
I can go. I think one of the biggest pieces of innovation is on the piece of software that we're talking through, Zoom. Oracle Cloud and Zoom decided to partner together. And it's a pretty interesting story how it happened, actually. So Zoom used to run on AWS, and the pandemic hit and everything as we know it went haywire. And suddenly there was no capacity, and Zoom had promised all of these schools a free tier so that kids could continue studying. And it was then that there was just no option that, they shared a relationship with Oracle that they just called them at midnight saying, hey, we know you have a cloud. Do you have any capacity? Can you help us out? And, before we knew it, they were migrating everything onto Oracle Cloud. So now they're one of our biggest customers. So it's really the way I see 2020 is, there's always this saying that, hey, here's your comfort zone. And this here is where the magic happens and it's right outside. But this year is like 5 kilometers away from that. So our comfort zone has been, that word doesn't exist anymore. And that has become a forcing function for us to do exactly what you said, Jayne, do something to survive. It's all about survival. And sometimes that has brought about the best in human behavior. We're more trustworthy, we're more willing to listen, we're more willing to understand. And from a technology perspective, technologies are thinking about, how do we support a situation that has literally never been seen before? How do we add that humane element that hasn't been seen before? So
yeah, and I think you bring up some really interesting points. We've never seen this before, where enterprises had to send entire workforces, and not just in a single region of the world, all around the world, to go work at home. And again, so capacity issues, bandwidth issues, trust issues, all became part of the equation. Who else? Christian, what did you see in terms of innovation? I mean, obviously in a startup that's looking to be disruptive, this is, I would expect, an interesting environment for you.
Yep, we have to react quickly, and we have to be on our toes at all times. I think that you're right. It's unprecedented. It's uncomfortable, but in some ways, I feel like we've never been more prepared to be able to do this. We have Zoom, we have Slack. Could you imagine trying to do COVID with AOL Instant Messenger? I mean, I don't know how well that would turn out. So I think for us at a small startup, that interaction with people and that high touch, especially as I go through POCs and start digging into the technology, and these are early adopters, and it's complex stuff. Being able to handhold them and be by their side and work with them, that's a huge advantage for us. And as a small company, we're still able to do that really well. And so with the COVID, everyone forcing everyone online and Zoom and especially Slack. So basically with our prospects and our customers, we set up private Slack channels for them in our community Slack so that our field engineers can work directly with them. And the more that we get them onto Slack and hands-on with our technology and kind of eliminate some of the BS around that, the more successful that we are. So we've found that getting people onto Slack, giving them the high touch customer interaction and so on, and dealing with people more directly, even though it's not in person, has been very very good for us. So we saw March, start to kick off into Q2 was our best quarter, and it's continuing, and we just closed our Series B round last week.
Awesome. Thank you. Kandarp, what about you? What have you seen this year? I mean, think about it. We're in October, which is just a scary, scary sentence. I'm not sure if we're still in February or we're already halfway through 2021, right? So time has taken on a new perspective. What have you seen in terms of innovation?
So, we have been hearing this sentence for a while. Well, change is a constant. Change is the only constant, right? And all the leaders around the industry keep using that. But this year has provided a big catalyst and forced everyone to implement it. Because it's mandatory. If you are really, really reluctant to those changes, you don't have a choice. And as my Christian and Rajsi is saying, it's really, really, this is a great opportunity. And without all the technological tools that are available today, becomes really hard. But I think we have entire industry has taken this as an opportunity, right? As as a Churchill said, never let a good crisis go to waste, right? And this is a classic example of that, right? I mean, as Christians say, there is a series on B. I mean, everyone's talking about all the economy and where things is going. In midst of that, companies like Solo, right, who are actually a true survival, they are the one who's marching ahead with it, right? And personally, what we have seen at Xactly as well, we our customers, we have customers who have been hit by this pandemic significantly, or we have customers who actually are growing significantly, right? So, like Zoom, so we have been helping all those customers, using, our machine learning platform to adjust their sales plan so that, they can adjust their revenues, they can adjust their targets, right? And it's a whole different set of challenge, right? I mean, we had to scramble and we had to figure out, okay, how do we help all these people all together, right? I mean, and it's been a great, it's been a great opportunity. And one of the other point which you also mentioned and Rajsi also mentioned is the human behavior has changed. What I feel is people has become more empathetic. I mean, that quality, the pandemic has triggered, I don't know if we should call innovation or whatever that is, but that quality in the people, it's come out strongly, right? Everyone has that, but now the pandemic has given us an opportunity to show that, and you can see that as a society we are much better now, overall.
That's such a great point, and especially, people are more forgiving, empathetic, and understanding virtually, like over Zoom and over email and over Slack and so on, right? You would expect maybe to see that in person, but I mean, to have it virtually like this that's an amazing observation.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I mean, at any minute, my dog may start barking outside my door, and people's children, and understanding, there's a social side to your work, right? There's a psychological side to your work, and maybe we haven't been as good at expressing our empathy, even in terms of soliciting professional opinion, right? So I do think this, I've been saying 2020 is the year of the human, because I think it's humans, and Ravi, I'll give you a chance to answer in a second, but the tech community, while we're so grateful to the healthcare providers and the essential workers and the first responders, the tech community really are the unsung heroes. Because if you look at the organizations that really prospered, it's organizations that had or were born out of the digital landscape. So Ravi, what about you? What have you seen in terms of innovation, either on an individual basis or an enterprise basis?
Oh, absolutely. I like going last and I can steal everybody's ideas. Good point.
That's awesome.
I'll start with, I'm sure everyone has seen those memes, what has triggered your digital innovation or digital transformation? Is it your customers? And answer C is usually the pandemic, and everyone's like, haha, in Twitter or LinkedIn, right? This is what triggered it. And so from a personal anecdote, so at Harness, we have statistics, we're a continuous delivery platform. So we can see an aggregate, what people are doing on the platform. So in North America, when the pandemic hit in March, there was a 2-week period that people were let's not do anything. We don't know if schools are open. Where can we get food? It was no one knew what a normal semblance of life was. But kind of going through the end of March, we saw a really big uptick in number of deployments from the previous quarter and previous year. There's a couple of reasons for that. I think from a standpoint of businesses, they had to adjust, right? And who's going to adjust things? Well, your technology teams would. A funny story. I was supposed to go to Las Vegas during the Final Four, and then I had to push the trip out in March. And one of my cousins who was flying with me, she was upset at the big airline here in Atlanta. She's like, well, why can't they just go in their system and edit something to give me credit for 6 months? And I started laughing. I'm like, there's probably 50 systems to touch to actually do that. It's as simple as it sounds to you and I. There's a lot of things that have to go on, and they have to maintain their business too. They're not going to turn off the ticketing system for a day, right? You need to do things in a particular order. And this is what we've seen in, on our platform. The number of deployments have actually increased because people have to adjust business rules. There's things you're touching that you don't know where the engineer went, or business continuity is starting to hit. So yeah, like Kandarp said, innovation. The saying is innovation comes out of toil, right? And similar to both Rajsi and Christian. What they were mentioning about people. Yeah, last little bit about it. I would say in technology, it's something called nits, nitpicks. And there's been a lot less of that. It's funny that Kandarp mentioned that and Christian mentioned that too. I'm I want to get roasted sometimes saying some stuff to our engineers, and they kind of backed off. I'm I guess we're all going through it together. So it's little nitpicks. It might be a survivor's guilt too. representing us in the paneling. We're all fairly lucky that we can work from home indefinitely, right? And so, putting things in perspective and empathizing, I think it's a big change.
Yeah, and I find that particularly fascinating because I think there is a sense of unity that maybe we didn't feel before, because there is not a region in the world that is not affected by this. And so DevOps Institute, our community is so international. And, when we hear about what's going on in Brazil or what's going on in India, certainly in Florida, we had a really bad summer where the number of cases was growing exponentially. There is a sense of sympathy. There's a sense of unity that what can we do to help you? Even from an enterprise perspective, I've seen a lot of enterprises that in the past may not have been as willing to help each other and suddenly really jumping at it, because there is hopefully a sense of a global presence of the humans. Let's talk about digital transformation. So, and everything you've said in the first comments really points to organizations that either had a digital footprint before the pandemic or very quickly developed at least a little bit of a baby footprint as they were moving through it. But as we come out of this, and we don't know when we're coming out, and we don't even know what the new normal looks like. I've seen so many different statistics on, 40% of the workforce will eventually go back to the office. Organizations will keep it this way. But one thing became very clear, and that's that digital transformation is really no longer an option. Organizations that really couldn't do it are filing for bankruptcies or having to be acquired or something along those lines, particularly in industries that were really heavily impacted. So let's talk about digital transformation coming out of this. What do you think the traditional, and I don't like the word legacy, so we're going to use heritage, that heritage organizations, those that have been around for a really long time, that were moving maybe a little bit more slowly, not all heritage organizations move slowly. What do they need to look at, recognizing that a digital footprint, a digital experience is now going to be in their future much faster than they probably originally thought? I think the pandemic pushed us ahead 5 years. Right? What do they need to think about? What do they need to look at before they all go rushing to the gate and do it wrong? So, Rajsi, let me start with you.
Yeah. By the way, I completely agree with your comment on the pandemic has pushed us 5 years out. I'll give you a very weird example, but my mom is a teacher in a low-income school in India, in Delhi. And kids there, when the pandemic hit, Zoom or Teams or things like that, they weren't options. People don't have laptops at home. They don't have stable internet connections. And so, the teachers were brainstorming, well, how do we ensure continued education? And they came up with this idea of WhatsApp, which is like a very low bandwidth messaging service that's very popular in India. Everybody at least has a smartphone that runs WhatsApp. And the teachers would literally hold the phones to their mouth and record a 30-minute lesson. This is what goes on, et cetera, and send photographs via WhatsApp in a group that's 50, 60 people. And then the kids would do their homework and send it back to the teacher. So it's true that the world is doing things that we can't imagine just to survive. And going back to your question about, okay, well, what should we think about when we talk about digital transformation? Well, first, recognizing that there is going to be some resistance to it. If there is no resistance, there is no change. So not fearing that resistance, but actually actively using it to your benefit, finding what the cracks in your plan are, et cetera. So that's one angle to it. The other angle, I think, is, and as a PM, maybe I'm biased, but always start with your customer. Always start with your customer. Think about what their needs are. What problems are we trying to solve for them? What value are we trying to add for them? And then work backwards from there to understand how your organization can evolve, transform, in order to make sure that we are providing that value just in new avenues.
But do you think values change? Do you think what a customer wants has changed over the last, say, 9-10 months? Ravi, I'm going to go to you because I'm not going to let you go last. So what do you think?
No.
You think it's changed what people want?
I think, as a consumer, like there's this concept of like consumerization of enterprise IT. And so like, here's my cell phone, like I'm so used to ease of use on this thing. Pretty much I expect ease of use for anything that I do to be as easy as using an app. And even more so the benefit of like using like an app, right? Like there's no touch, right? Like I don't have to deal with anybody. Like even traditional industries. A good example would be the mortgage industry. I refinanced my house about 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, and I used an online service that was like, wow. I remember like, even 3 or 4 years ago when I bought my house, I had to go to the bank, I had to meet somebody, I had to deal with the loan officer, and I was like, this is asinine. I don't want to deal with people. And then finally, like come around, like some of my friends were telling me, just go ahead and do it. Go to this website and just enter your information. And it was it, right? And I was like, wow, this is pretty easy. But imagine the transformation that company had to go through. That'd be no touch, right? They send someone virtually to your house. Like they had everything set up. So it was like pandemic being, it was easy. And if there wasn't a pandemic, like I don't think I would have closed as fast on the refinance, right? So like, yes, there's a lot of stuff that's happening that, push, steal Rajsi's 5 years out, right? Like I couldn't imagine this 5 years from now. And it was super simple to do.
Yeah, and which is really kind of fascinating because the requirement is now, I want to do it contactless. I want to do it more digitally than that. Kandarp, what about you? What do you think about digital transformation as we go into 2021?
So one of the important things that I feel is required for any enterprise, software company is customers are looking for a partner in their journey. They're not looking for you as a vendor. They are looking for you as a partner, right? And you, as a company need to think about, okay, what are the value you can provide? And as been said, if Henry Ford has asked their customers, what do you want? The customers would say, I want faster horses, right? That's not the point. I mean, and and there are customers who are in those boat, as you mentioned. They are still trying to figure out what's going on, right? They are still trying to, blaze through this chaos, trying to find the pattern that they can't see. And where is some of your smart customers? They can see it, but there are many of your customers who don't see that. So you have to enable them, right, significantly faster in order to make sure that they blaze fast. In turns, you need to help them to help you, right? Because that's what they are looking for. And if I'm in the board of someone who is still getting into their digital transformation journey, I think one of the most important thing to change is of course vision and the strategy and all those things, but the culture in your company, the mindset of a people. If that's the same, doesn't matter you bring 15 smartest engineer in the world. If your leadership mindset and philosophy doesn't change, you're not going to be able to make the strides.
Culture has changed, hasn't it? I mean, think about it. It had to change where we had to develop more trust. We had to allow people more autonomy in how they got their work done. We had to interact differently. And so, again, I think this pushed us forward. We look at Agile, we look at DevOps, we look at SRE. They're self-organizing systems, which a lot of companies were pretty uncomfortable with. And now I think had to become very comfortable with that.
Yeah, and then you did mention about the self-organizing, small teams. And Rajsi gave a great example, right? The self-organizing, the teacher and that they're a small classroom. You need to treat your teams like that. Let them self-organize and let them drive you. Right? I think that's a great analogy, great example.
Yeah, I agree. And again, when we even look at Rajsi's example of the teachers had to figure it out. Humans are very good at that, but it may not be sustainable in the long run, right? Which is why digital transformation will take the seeds of those ideas and hopefully take it forward. Christian, what about you? Digital transformation, if I'm an organization that maybe has been a little bit slower, or because we're very complex, haven't been able to date to really be able to step down the DevOps, I don't want to say the DevOps waterfall because that's pretty old, but Um, but really step into it. What do they need to think about? What should they be looking at for next year?
Gosh, Kandarp took the angle that I was going to talk about right out of my mouth. Because what we've seen is the culture change, the real culture change, right, is not evenly distributed, and the real the digital transformation initiatives, again, is not evenly distributed across the organizations that at least we're talking with. We see there's a lot more fear and existential position in the ones that haven't invested as much into modernizing their IT engine to be able to this idea of innovation. I always say it's about acknowledging that you don't know what these changes are going to be, and you don't know what's going to happen, but you have an engine to be able to learn from various hypotheses about what could happen or might happen, right? So building that IT engine to be able to enable that, the organizations that we've worked with that started going down that path, they're going down that path, and they're pretty successul. But Kandarp mentioned the idea of partnership. Even they are not fully sure what are the next steps. What is technology? What is the direction that technology is going to go? What can they do with this new technology? And partnering with for example, like in our space, like a startup that is blazing a trail and pointing in the right direction, and working very closely with them. Not saying that we know everything, but that we are able to go faster and learn what is going to work and what's not going to work before our organizations that we're working with, our partner organizations, and then bring them, some of these best practices. So I think this idea of partnership, agreeing that you don't know exactly what's going to happen, so let's find the people who are able to move quickly and figure it out, and work closely with them, and then work together to establish the right trajectory.
And, and that's a great segue to my next question, which is really about people. So find the right people, Right. We know before the pandemic, there was a huge skills gap. DevOps Institute every year fields an important community project known as the Upskilling Enterprise DevOps Skills Survey, which at the end of this, I'm going to make a plea to everybody to please take a few minutes and fill out the survey for 2021. But we know we want developers to become more hybrid, right? We know we want engineers at all levels to start to really groom new skills. We know that the shelf life of your current skills may be shorter than ever before. So what does the innovative human, because these organizations really can't innovate without critical thinking skills from people, what sort of skills should the developer in particular be looking at growing over the next few months? Again, we've seen this year, I think, as with an emphasis on learning. What kind of skills do we need for the next decade? And so, Kandarp, I'm going to start with you. What skills do we need?
Sure. So, various technical, industry needs various skills, but more of an, or philosophical aspect of it, or as a developer, what I need to know is if you haven't embraced yet, change is the only constant, then you gotta do that first, right? Look yourself in the mirror and then convince yourself that this change is the only constant, right? Now then create a journey towards that. Like, what are the skill set that I can put into my bucket in order to make myself ready 5 years, 10 years down the line, right? And again, going back to the philosophy, mentality that, so far I see there are some companies, there are some, great startups who are blazing the trail, in the DevOps role, right? Where traditionally I categorize, the folks into the DevOps migrant versus DevOps native, right? I mean, I consider myself DevOps, migrant because, coming from C++ all the way from, automation and CI/CD deployment, right? So for someone like me, it's harder, to get into this path, right? And if you are in this path where you have to skill yourself, into more of, more complete automation way, then you need to train yourself such that you know all these things. Plus, I would say as a developer, generally the mentality, I think most of the organizations say they're agile, they follow practice. Let's assume that all in a good shape and a good faith, right? And they do done, right? Okay, I'm done with the testing. I'm done with the developer. There's a one done they need to add, which is done as a DevOps. Generally the flow is, okay, I wrote my code, unit testing, right? The integration testing, functional testing, all those things are done, right? All right, I'm done with my Scrum story. But you need to add one more variation now. And if you have not, I think you should definitely consider it. Is it deployable ready? I mean, can I push a button and it go live and my customers can use it, right? And those three dones, like done, done, and done, if you're not doing that, I think you're going to be a really, really big trouble in like next 6 to 12 months, because everyone is looking at that.
Christian, I'm not going to let you go last this time. So feed on Kandarp. What do you think? What kind of skills?
Yeah, and I'm partial bias and so on. So, but I came from a developer background. I'm still consider myself more of a developer than I would, operations per se. But we build a lot of tools and infrastructure at Solo that fit in the middle, and just like containers, just like Kubernetes, just like some of these technologies kind of spurred the next generation of deployment and automation and so on. Service mesh and these technologies fit as a layer on top and fit in that same space. So coming from that perspective, I would say that the skills that developers should hone in on are things around what is happening a little bit lower level than just your app, right? Are you aware of what the platform is made? You don't have to be an expert in it, but are you able to drive configurations for it? Are you and understand what those are and the implications of those? Are you familiar with debugging in those environments and so on? So I think pushing developers into their uncomfort zone in terms of what is all the stuff that's running their app is a very valuable skill, because then they become more aware of things. When things go wrong, they're able to help out.
Awesome, thank you. Rajsi, what about you?
If I may, Jayne, one thing I would like to add what Christian said, and when you talk about the going lower level, they just click something when I looked at on the LinkedIn is, I see a post of a job. It says full stack marketing specialist, right? I mean, think about that. Full stack marketing specialist, right? Means even the completely different field, they want you to do everything. They want you to know, I think, everything. You can be specialized in one stream, but you need to know majority of your stack, right? So that's exactly what aligns to what Christian has been saying about, yeah, I mean, it's great. You might be a great developer, but you need to know at least. You may not be specialized in that skill, but you need to know how things works.
Yeah. I think that developer tools are important. All of this is very critical. And, Kandarp and Christian have already covered some parts of that. But there are two parts to it, right? One is an expert mindset. And that's like, well, I'm an expert in this. I know everything there is to know. And that by definition has a ceiling, right? There's only so much that you can know about a particular thing. And there's a second kind of mindset, which is a more learning-based mindset, which is, hey, I'm really good at problem solving and I'm good at all of these skills. But, when I think about my skill set as an inverted T, the long line there is not a particular tool, but it's my learning mindset. I can figure it out. And I think that is what's key to drive adaptability, to drive innovation, because a lot of times innovation is more iterative. Of course, 2020 has been a wide exception to that rule, but that iterativeness ensures that, you have to constantly be innovating. So it's not like, okay, well, I learned this new skill one more time and now I'm done. It's really not like that. It's like every single day you have to come in and figure things out, learn, dive deep, so on and so forth. Another thing that I think is interesting with developers, and I think corporate America in general, is that we're going to have an enhanced sense of remote empathy when we come back to work. So somebody like me, I never worked remotely, but I did work with remote teams all the time. And And I tell you, I did not understand the pains as much as I do right now. So from a human perspective, I think when we think about work and innovation, there's, okay, well, how do I get it done? And who do I get it done with? And I think we're going to be better on both aspects if we focus on the complete picture.
I love that, because in the survey, in the 2020 report, even the 2019 report, your human skills are considered as valuable. We used to call them soft skills, but they're really not very soft, are they? That your human skills are considered as valuable, both as a prospective employee, as an existing employee, as your technical and your process skills. So I think we're honing those as well. Okay, Ravi, I let you go last. So skills. What skills, particularly for developers, because everything that we've talked about today has a development element to it, right? But, moving to contactless wasn't something magical. There was a team of developers that had to do that in every organization. What skills do they need as we even emerge further into the new decade?
Yeah, like even taking the pandemic out of the equation, I think there's two companies. There's a book company in South Lake Union in the Seattle area, and there's a movie company in Los Gatos in the Bay Area that they're embracing something called the full lifecycle developer, right? And so this is going to touch on something all three of the panelists have just said. Is that in my background, it's actually pretty similar to Christian. Like I probably had 40 J's on my resume before I started looking at infrastructure, right? So my background's in JEE as a developer. And there's a lot more of a slant towards infrastructure. Like to Kandarp's point, do you have a deployable unit? Can you take it? Are you metriced on making sure something is live or not? And that's been a pretty recent change. I'm a little bit pessimistic on those type of things. Like, hey, you can't, going back to Rajsi's point, like there's only so much you can learn, right? Like you can't be an expert in everything. But what I see happening, especially with organizations like where Christian works currently, right? Like what Solo is enabling. There's a little more of an operation slant that there's iteration, right? Like there's iteration in places that have not had iteration before. Like my biggest outage was a networking outage. And, if we were using a service mesh, it would have been a moot point. We would have rerouted, right? It would have been easy to deploy, but unfortunately it was like more physical routers. And it was like, oh boy. But that's the case, right? Like, hey, we're allowing for innovation to happen because we're allowing for more iteration. The technology, if you look at from say container orchestration to anything in between, it's allowing for an iteration. Because as a developer, still in that mindset, like I never have gotten something right the first time. So we're allowing for more iteration to happen, and then more like atomic iteration. And then when we get something right, we can promote it very quickly. So we can fail fast and learn fast also.
Yeah, and I think you said a couple of interesting things, in particular that as we talk about these hybrid humans, right? That's the term that DevOps Institute has been coining, that we want people to be hybrids, which means you may be a developer, but you have a DevSecOps awareness. You are a test-driven developer. You know how to write it, you know how to build it, you know how to deploy it, secure it, deploy it, operate it. And there are those that just feel like that kind of Atlas shrug, like I'm just carrying so much that I just can't bear it. And the goal is you don't have to be an expert at everything. You need to know just enough about everything so that you can identify a vulnerability in your code. You do know how to write a test case. You do understand, is it deployable, hopefully with some continuous deployment. So we're going to run out of time. I kind of wanted to wrap up with a little bit of prediction. What do you predict? What does 2021 look like? What are the things that enterprises, your customers, really need to focus on? And if we're having the same conversation, now again, we know there's some wild cards, so I'm not asking you to necessarily break out the crystal ball, but if we're having this conversation a year from now, what do we hope? Obviously, we all hope and pray for good health, but what do we hope in terms of digital transformation? So, Christian, I'll let you go first.
Thank you. Yeah. So, what I hope is, the organizations that have put a lot of effort into automating their testing, automating their deployments, and getting code changes out into productions faster. What I hope to see is a continued uptick from what we see right now of organizations automating the networking layer as well. And by networking, I mean automating traffic routing, failovers, failback, security, so securing traffic by default from end to end, telemetry collection, observability, and doing that in a in a way that fits very harmoniously with what they've already started to undertake in terms of automating their deployment. So, I think that will help alleviate some of the roadblocks and bottlenecks that they otherwise see today, to enable them to innovate, fail fast, and go and continue down that trajectory.
Awesome, thank you. Rajsi, what about you? What do you predict?
I think Christian has set a great point around failing fast. So I really hope that our organizational culture allows us to fail so that we can continue to innovate. So I hope we get comfortable with the idea of iterative innovation. I hope we continue to add value to our customers, and in particular around the digital transformation journey. I think Ravi said the right thing. Like, is your code in the hands of your customer? And we really want to get feedback fast. We want to learn fast, and we want to iterate fast so that we're maximizing value.
Awesome, thank you. Kandarp, what about you? What do you predict?
So, I would say everyone will start from automation first, just like Christian said. And automation first is going to be the norm. It's not going to be an option, right? And one of the biggest uptake I see is that will drive this entire security space, to innovate way much faster. And the automation, all the DevOps, companies they're partnering with security, the combination of the DevOps and the security, right? I think that's going to be the key, because that will enable all the current companies and the future startups to reach to the pinnacle of their success.
Fantastic, thank you. Ravi.
I always enjoy going last.
I know, that's why I let you.
I think, taking a look at all three of the firms that folks work at here, it's like there's a lot of what I see standardization starting to occur. So let's say like we were like the Brady Bunch, and we magically each one of us swapped jobs with somebody else. Like now we're tackling the learning curve, right? And so for areas of technology that have a very steep learning curve, for example, I always like to pick on networking because I'm bad at networking, right? Or even deploying something. I've been in a dozen development teams, and we all deployed every single time. We deployed differently, and no matter what team we were on. It's that we're marching towards standardization, right? Like, hey, there is some sort of standardization that we can have. And so if we were to like change jobs, the learning curve is shortening, and then that's benefits to everybody, right? Like, hey, you're able to have faster time to value. Your people are starting to innovate more, so being frustrated with technology, and this is benefits to the internal and external customers. So yeah, I see more standardization occurring.
Good, thank you. Thank you all. I think this was a really healthy conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope people listening to it got something out of it. We don't know what the next year is going to look like. We really don't. And so, of course, we collectively pray for good health. We pray for a recovery of economies. And I think moving into a digital landscape is going to help many organizations really kind of navigate through these waters and start to get more comfortable with what we all agreed was pushing us 5 years into the future. So hopefully we get a chance to get together again next year and see if our predictions were right. I'm going to end with a plea. I mentioned before, DevOps Institute runs an annual upskilling report. The survey is open now. Please go up to the DevOps Institute website, take a few minutes, fill out the survey, because that helps us really analyze data and see if our predictions are correct. Again, it's a community project. You can download last year's report, but we are pleading to everybody to please give us your input so we can serve you better. Harness, thank you. Thank you for an unscripted opportunity for panel and a discussion of innovation. Enjoy the rest of the event. Enjoy the rest of the year, and then we'll all talk to you soon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jayne. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, folks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.